Tonight, we're continuing the Pokemon deep dive with quick history, trivia, and overlooked details. Metapod is one of those Pokemon that feels simple at first glance, almost like it exists only as a stepping stone on the way to something more exciting. It's the middle stage in the Caterpie evolution line, sitting between Caterpie and Butterfree, and because of that, many trainers meet it early, use it briefly, and then move on. But when you slow down and really look at Metapod, it becomes clear that it represents a very specific idea in the Pokemon world: the quiet, patient phase of growth, where not much seems to be happening on the outside, but everything is changing underneath. Metapod first appeared in the original Pokemon Red and Blue games, where it was found early in the Kanto region, especially in places like Viridian Forest. Its role in the early game is easy to understand. Caterpie evolves into Metapod quickly, and Metapod then evolves into Butterfree not long after. This rapid evolution is part of why Caterpie is such a popular early Pokemon for new players. It gives you the satisfying feeling of growth and progress within the first hour of gameplay. Metapod is right in the middle of that process, acting as the calm pause before the final transformation. In terms of design, Metapod is basically a chrysalis. It's shaped like a smooth, segmented shell with a pointed top and a sturdy, rounded base. The overall look is meant to resemble the cocoon stage of a real-world caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Pokemon often takes inspiration from real animals, but Metapod is one of the clearest examples of that inspiration being translated almost directly into a creature. It isn't a complicated hybrid animal or a mythical beast. It's a cocoon with a face, and that simplicity is part of its charm. Metapod's Pokédex entries have always emphasized how hard its shell is. Across many games, the Pokédex describes Metapod as being covered in a hard shell that protects its soft body while it prepares to evolve. It also often mentions that Metapod can't move much, or that it barely moves at all. This makes Metapod sound almost helpless, but the entries also suggest that this stillness is intentional. Metapod isn't weak because it's lazy. It's conserving energy and protecting itself during a vulnerable stage of life. That idea is reflected in Metapod's behavior in the games. Metapod is famous for knowing Harden, and in the early generations, that's basically all it does. When you encounter a wild Metapod in the tall grass, it might just use Harden repeatedly, increasing its defense stat while doing no damage to you. This is one of those moments that many players remember because it can feel a little funny. You're ready for a battle, and the Metapod just sits there, stiffening its shell again and again. In the original games, this created a very specific kind of battle experience. If you were using a weak Pokemon with only low power moves, you might notice the fight dragging on because Metapod's defense kept rising. It wasn't dangerous, but it was stubborn. It could turn into a slow little test of patience. This is where the phrase, Metapod used Harden, became a small meme among fans, because of how often it happens and how repetitive it can feel. Metapod's stats also support this identity. It has a very low attack stat and a very limited move pool, but it has decent defense for such an early Pokemon. It's not designed to win battles through aggression. It's designed to survive long enough to reach its final stage. In a way, Metapod is the most literal, defensive Pokemon in the early game because defense is basically all it has. This is interesting because Pokemon evolution is often portrayed as a straightforward improvement, but Metapod shows that evolution lines can have stages that are not immediately useful. Metapod is not meant to be your star battler. It's meant to represent the awkward in-between stage, the stage where growth is happening but you can't see the results yet. When Metapod evolves into Butterfree, the difference is dramatic. Butterfree gains wings, a wider move pool, and access to status moves like sleep powder and confusion in many games. It becomes a real battler, especially in the early parts of the story, that makes Metapod feel like the calm before the storm, the quiet moment before everything changes. Metapod's counterpart in the same generation is Kakuna, which evolves from Weedle into Beedrill. Kakuna fills the same role for Weedle that Metapod fills for Caterpie. Both are cocoon Pokemon. Both have hardened shells. Both rely heavily on defensive moves. But Metapod and Kakuna are also slightly different in how players remember them. Butterfree is often seen as more useful than Beedrill in the early game because of its access to psychic-type moves and sleep-inducing powders, which makes Metapod's evolution line feel a bit more rewarding. In the anime, Metapod also plays a memorable role, especially early on. Ash catches a Caterpie that evolves into Metapod and then into Butterfree. The Metapod stage is shown as a time where Caterpie is stuck, unable to battle properly, and it creates tension because Ash wants to keep moving forward. There's also the famous moment where Ash's Metapod battles another trainer's Metapod, and both Pokemon just use Harden over and over. This scene is often remembered because it captures exactly what Metapod is like in the games. It's a battle of pure defense and stubbornness, with very little action. Even though Metapod is not a powerful Pokemon in the competitive sense, it has a lasting cultural footprint because it's one of the first Pokemon many players encounter that feels different. Caterpie is active, moving around, attacking. Metapod is still. It's quiet. It's a Pokemon that teaches you, in a subtle way, that not every creature in this world is meant to be a fighter right away. Metapod also highlights something about the early Pokemon design philosophy. In Generation 1, many Pokemon were designed with very clear roles. Caterpie was the early bug. Metapod was the cocoon stage. Butterfree was the final flying bug with psychic abilities. This line is simple and easy to understand, which is part of why it works so well for beginners. Over the years, Metapod has appeared in many games beyond Kanto. It's often available early because Caterpie is a common early game Pokemon in many regions. Metapod's presence in multiple games reinforces its identity as a familiar part of the Pokemon world, almost like a symbol of the early journey. Metapod's name itself is also interesting. It combines meta, which can mean change or transformation, with pod, like a container. The name perfectly describes what it is, a container for transformation. In Japanese, Metapod is called Transil, which also references transformation. These names show that even in the earliest days of Pokemon, the designers were thinking carefully about how names could reflect a creature's purpose. Metapod's shiny form is another small detail that some fans appreciate. In many games, shiny Metapod has a slightly different coloration, often leaning more toward a lighter or more golden tone. Shiny Pokemon are rare, and finding a shiny Metapod early in the game can be a fun surprise. It's not the most visually dramatic shiny, but it's still a special find, especially because of how early Metapod can appear. In terms of habitat, Metapod is usually associated with forests and grassy areas, which fits the idea of a cocoon hanging from trees or hiding in leaves. The Pokédex often describes it as staying in a fixed place, waiting for evolution. That suggests Metapod isn't wandering around, searching for food, or fighting other Pokemon. It's simply surviving until the next stage of life begins. One of the more subtle facts about Metapod is that its defensive identity can actually be useful in certain challenge runs. In a Nuzlocke, for example, where every Pokemon matters and resources are limited, Metapod's higher defense can help it survive hits that would knock out other early Pokemon. Even if it doesn't deal much damage, it can sometimes act as a temporary wall, giving you time to heal or switch safely. Metapod is also an example of how Pokemon evolution lines can teach patience. If you catch a Caterpie and it evolves into Metapod, you might feel like you lost something. Caterpie could at least tackle or string shot. Metapod just hardens. But if you keep training it, even just a few levels, it becomes butterfree, and suddenly you have a Pokemon with real utility. That small journey is like a miniature version of the whole Pokemon experience. Invest time, watch growth, and eventually see results. In later generations, Metapod gained access to a few more moves, but it never really lost its identity as the hardened Pokemon. That's part of what makes it iconic. Even as the series expanded, Metapod stayed true to its role. It remains a cocoon, a defense-focused stage, a quiet moment in the middle of an evolution line. There's also something almost comforting about Metapod's simplicity. In a world where Pokemon can become incredibly complex, with multiple forms, regional variants, mega evolutions, and elaborate lore, Metapod is just a cocoon. It doesn't need a complicated backstory. It doesn't need a special gimmick. It exists as a natural part of a simple life cycle. And because Metapod is so common, it becomes a shared memory for many players. Almost everyone who has played a Pokemon game has seen Metapod. Many have caught one, many have watched it sit there and harden. It's one of those Pokemon that doesn't stand out because it's powerful, but because it's familiar. In the end, Metapod is a reminder that the Pokemon world includes all stages of life, not just the flashy final forms. It represents growth and progress, the waiting period between the beginning and the outcome. It's a small, quiet Pokemon that teaches, without saying anything, that sometimes the most important changes happen when everything looks still on the surface, and that patience can be part of the journey, even in a world filled with battles and adventure. Fearow is one of those Pokemon that carries a very classic kind of energy, the kind that feels like it belongs to the earliest days of the series, when the world of Pokemon was still being introduced through simple routes, tall grass, and the steady rhythm of traveling from town to town. It's a large, sharp-beaked bird Pokemon that most players come to know as the final evolution of Spearow, and in many games, it shows up around the early to mid stages of an adventure, right at the point where your team starts to take shape and you begin to think about what roles each Pokemon might fill. Fearow first appeared in Generation 1, the original Pokemon Red and Blue games, and it has remained a familiar presence across many later titles. In Kanto, Spearow is commonly found on routes like Route 3, Route 4, and other early areas, meaning Fearow often becomes one of the first fully evolved Pokemon a player can obtain without needing a special stone or a trade. Spearow evolves into Fearow at level 20, which is relatively early compared to some evolution lines, and that early evolution makes Fearow feel like a reward for steady training. Visually, Fearow is designed to look more intimidating than many other early bird Pokemon. It has a long neck, a narrow body, and wings that look built for speed and endurance rather than fluffiness. Its most defining feature is its large, pointed beak, which looks more like a spear than a normal bird's beak. That design choice makes Fearow feel like a predator, a hunter of the skies rather than a gentle creature. In a world full of cute Pokemon, Fearow stands out as something sharper and more serious. Fearow's Pokédex entries often emphasize how it lives and hunts. Many entries describe it as a Pokemon that can fly long distances without resting, using its strong wings to stay in the air for hours at a time. This is a detail that fits its role as a traveling companion in the early games. Flying-type Pokemon are often used for travel, especially once you obtain the HM Fly. While Fearow is not the only Pokemon that can learn Fly, its design and lore make it feel like a natural fit for the role. In gameplay terms, Fearow is a normal and flying type Pokemon. That typing gives it a useful set of resistances and weaknesses. It is immune to ground type moves, thanks to being a flying type, and it resists bug and grass attacks. However, it is weak to electric, ice, and rock type moves. These weaknesses matter, especially later in the game when more trainers begin using rock type coverage moves or electric type attacks become more common. One of Fearow's most notable strengths is its speed. Fearow has historically been a fast Pokemon, especially for its era, and that speed allows it to strike first in many battles. Speed is one of those stats that quietly changes the feel of a Pokemon. A fast Pokemon makes battles feel smooth, because you often get the first move, and if you can knock out an opponent quickly, you avoid taking damage at all. Fearow often fits into that kind of playstyle, where it darts in, hits hard, and leaves. Fearow also has a decent attack stat, which pairs well with its speed. In early generations, this made it a strong physical attacker, especially when using flying-type moves like Drill Peck. Drill Peck is one of Fearow's signature moves in many games, and it's often considered one of the best flying-type attacks because it is reliable and powerful without major drawbacks. In the days when move variety was more limited, having a move like Drill Peck made Fearow feel like a dependable fighter. Fearow's move pool has always leaned towards straightforward physical attacks. It learns moves like Peck early on, which later become stronger flying moves, and it can also learn normal type moves that benefit from its attack stat. Moves like Return, for example, can become extremely strong if you build friendship, though Fearow's role as a fast attacker means it often doesn't need many turns to finish a fight. Fearow's relationship with Spearow is also part of its identity. Spearow is often portrayed as aggressive and territorial, and Fearow continues that theme on a larger scale. While some bird Pokemon in the series are presented as calm and majestic, Fearow is often described as fierce and relentless. It feels like the kind of Pokemon that would chase something down rather than simply glide peacefully. In the anime, Fearow is most famous for being part of an early conflict involving Ash and Pikachu. In the first season, a flock of Spearow attacks Ash after he throws a rock at one, and the encounter escalates into a chaotic chase that ends with Pikachu using a powerful electric attack. That moment is one of the earliest demonstrations of Pikachu's power, and Spearow, and later Fearow, become associated with that memory. Even though the anime does not focus heavily on Fearow later, that early scene helped cement Spearow and Fearow as aggressive wild Pokemon in the minds of many fans. Fearow also appears in various Pokemon spin-off games, including Pokemon Go, where it continues to function as a fast flying type attacker. In Pokemon Go, Fearow has access to moves like Peck and Drill Peck, which again reinforces its identity. Even outside the main series, Fearow's role stays consistent. It is a straightforward, quick bird Pokemon that hits hard with its beak. Another interesting aspect of Fearow is how it compares to Pidgeot, the other major early bird Pokemon in Generation 1. Many players choose between Pidgeot and Fearow as their main flying type. Pidgey is more common and appears earlier, making Pidgeot easier to obtain for many players. Fearow, on the other hand, often feels more aggressive and has slightly different stats. Historically, Fearow has been known for its speed and attack, while Pidgeot has sometimes been viewed as more balanced. This makes Fearow appealing to players who want a faster, more offense-focused flying type. Fearow also has a unique name origin that fits its design. The name Fearow combines fear with sparrow, suggesting a sparrow that inspires fear. This is clever because Spearow is clearly based on a sparrow. But Fearow's evolution takes that simple bird and turns it into something much more intimidating. The name implies that it's not just a bird, but a bird that makes other creatures nervous. In Japanese, Fearow is called Oni Drill, which references an Oni, a type of demon from Japanese folklore, and drill, which fits its beak. This name makes its aggressive identity even more explicit. It's essentially Demon Drill, which is a surprisingly intense name for a bird Pokemon, but it matches the idea that Fearow is not meant to be gentle. Fearow's design also includes a distinctive crest of feathers on its head, which adds to its silhouette. Pokemon design often relies on clear shapes that can be recognized instantly, and Fearow's long beak and head crest make it easy to identify even in simple pixel art. In the original Game Boy games, where sprites were limited, Fearow still looked like Fearow. That's a sign of a strong design. Fearow's habitat in the Pokédex is often described as open plains, fields, or areas where it can fly freely. This fits the idea that it's a Pokemon built for long-distance travel. It's not a bird that hides in forests. It's a bird that dominates the sky. There are also some small mechanical facts about Fearow that stand out across generations. In the early games, normal and flying type moves were often physical, and Fearow benefited from that because its attack stat was solid. Later generations introduced the physical and special split, which changed how moves were categorized. Fearow continued to perform well as a physical attacker because many of its best moves remained physical. This meant Fearow stayed consistent in its role even as the game's battle mechanics evolved. Fearow is also capable of learning some unusual moves through TMs and tutors. Depending on the generation, it can learn moves like Steel Wing, which gives it a way to hit rock types more effectively. It can also learn moves like U-turn in later generations, allowing it to strike and then switch out, which fits its identity as a fast hit-and-run attacker. Fearow's stats are not legendary, but they are practical. It is the kind of Pokemon that feels reliable in a playthrough. It doesn't require complicated strategies. You don't need to build around it. You can simply teach it a strong flying move, a strong normal move, and maybe a coverage move, and it will perform well in many battles. This reliability is part of why Fearow remains memorable even though it isn't a mascot Pokemon. It's not Pikachu. It's not Charizard. It's not a legendary. It's simply a strong bird that does its job well. In many ways, Pokemon is filled with creatures like this. Pokemon that are not flashy, but become important because they help you travel and fight consistently. Fearow also plays a role in demonstrating how Pokemon progression works. Spearow starts small, with basic moves. It evolves into Fearow, becoming stronger, faster, and more capable. This evolution happens at a point in the game where you're likely starting to face tougher opponents, so Fearow's evolution feels like it arrives at the right time. It's a small example of how Pokemon games often pace evolution to match story progression. In the context of Kanto specifically, Fearow can be useful in battles against grass types, bug types, and fighting types because flying moves are strong against those categories. This means Fearow can help in gyms like Erika's, where grass types dominate, and it can also help against trainers who rely on fighting Pokemon. This makes it a versatile team member, especially if you don't have other strong flying options. Fearow's weaknesses also teach players about planning. Rock-type moves are dangerous to Fearow, and rock types often appear in caves and mountains. Electric types can also threaten it, especially in places like the power plant. Ice moves become more common later, particularly in the Elite Four. Fearow can still be useful in those areas, but you need to be careful. This is part of the experience of using a flying type. You gain immunity to ground, but you accept vulnerability to certain other threats. Over the years, Fearow has remained mostly unchanged in terms of identity. It has not received a mega evolution. It has not received a regional form. It has not been given a dramatic new gimmick. In a way, this makes Fearow feel like a piece of Pokemon history preserved. It is still the same fast, sharp-beaked bird it was in 1996, and that consistency is part of its charm. Fearow is not a Pokemon that demands attention. It doesn't have a complicated lore story. It doesn't have a special myth attached to it. It simply exists as a natural predator of the skies, a creature that can fly for hours, strike quickly, and return to the open air. And in the calm rhythm of a Pokemon journey, Fearow fits perfectly as a companion that feels steady, dependable, and always ready to take flight whenever the road ahead stretches long and quiet. Electrode is a Pokemon that feels instantly recognizable, even if you've never used it on a team for very long. It looks like a Pokeball with a face, flipped upside down in color, and that simple design makes it stand out in a world filled with dragons, birds, ghosts, and strange creatures made of living plants or metal. Electrode is the evolved form of Voltorb, and together, the two of them represent one of the earliest examples of Pokemon taking inspiration from objects in the human world and turning them into living beings with their own behavior, habitats, and place in the ecosystem. Electrode first appeared in Generation 1, introduced as part of the original 151 Pokemon in the Kanto region. Voltorb evolves into Electrode at level 30, which is a little later than some early game evolutions, but still well within the range of a typical playthrough. In the original games, you often encountered Voltorb in places connected to electricity or technology, such as the power plant, and that location choice made a lot of sense. Voltorb and Electrode feel like they belong in places where energy is concentrated, where machinery hums, and where the air feels charged. The most obvious thing about Electrode is its appearance. It is perfectly round, with a simple face that can look cheerful, angry, or mischievous depending on the artwork. In some official illustrations, Electrode looks like it's grinning, as if it enjoys causing trouble. In others, it looks tense, like it's barely holding itself together. That range of expression fits Electrode's defining trait in the Pokédex. It is unstable, energetic, and prone to exploding. Electrode's Pokédex entries across the series repeatedly mention that it stores electricity in its body and that it can explode at the slightest shock. Some entries describe it as being so full of energy that it's constantly on the verge of bursting. Others mention that it is attracted to power plants or places where electricity is abundant. The theme is consistent. Electrode is a Pokemon that is literally dangerous to be around, not because it wants to hurt you necessarily, but because it is unstable by nature. This concept becomes even more memorable when you consider Electrode's signature reputation in battle. Electrode is famous for being fast. In fact, in many generations, Electrode has had one of the highest speed stats among non-legendary Pokemon. In the early games, where speed mattered even more because it also influenced critical hit rates, Electrode's speed made it feel like a Pokemon that always moved first, always acted before the opponent could react. That speed has practical implications. Electrode can set up moves like Light Screen and Reflect quickly, protecting the team. It can use Thunder Wave to paralyze opponents before they can attack. It can also use moves like Rain Dance in later generations, helping electric attacks become more reliable and boosting certain strategies. Even if Electrode's offensive power isn't the highest, its speed allows it to control the pace of a battle. But of course, the most famous thing about Electrode is explosion. In many games, Electrode learns self-destruct or explosion naturally, and those moves are among the most dramatic attacks in Pokemon. They cause the user to faint, but they deal enormous damage in return. In the early generations, explosion and self-destruct were even more powerful because of how damage calculation worked. They were often used as a last resort, a way to take down a tough opponent quickly. This creates an interesting identity for Electrode. On one hand, it's a fast support Pokemon that can set up screens and disrupt opponents. On the other hand, it's also a ticking time bomb that can end itself in a huge blast. That combination makes Electrode feel unpredictable. Even if you know what it can do, you never fully relax when you're facing one, because you always have to consider the possibility that it might explode. Electrode's electric typing gives it a specific set of strengths and weaknesses. Electric types are strong against water and flying types, which are common throughout many Pokemon games. They resist electric and flying moves, and they are weak to ground-type attacks. This weakness is important because ground moves are very common, and ground types are often used as a counter to electric Pokemon. In fact, ground types are immune to electric moves entirely, which means Electrode can be completely shut down by the wrong matchup. In the Kanto region, Electrode's main home, ground types like Dugtrio or Golem can be dangerous opponents. If you're using Electrode in a playthrough, you have to be mindful of that. You can't just click Thunderbolt and expect it to work against everything. You need coverage moves, or you need to switch out when a ground type appears. Electrode's move pool is not huge, but it includes some useful options. Thunderbolt is one of the most reliable electric moves, and Electrode can use it well. It also learns Thunder, which is stronger but less accurate, and can become more reliable in rain. It can learn Swift, which never misses, and in some generations it can learn Hidden Power, allowing it to gain coverage depending on its type. In later generations, Electrode gained access to more utility moves, including Taunt, which prevents opponents from using status moves, and Volt Switch, which allows it to attack and then switch out. Volt Switch fits Electrode's identity perfectly. It moves fast, strikes with electricity, and then rolls away, leaving the battlefield before the opponent can respond. The idea of Electrode rolling is another subtle part of its design. Because it's round, it makes sense that it would move by rolling. The Pokédex sometimes describes Voltorb and Electrode rolling around like balls, sometimes even being mistaken for actual Pokeballs. This creates a small but memorable world detail. In the Pokemon world, trainers might reach for what they think is an item, only to discover it's a living creature. This is also part of why Voltorb and Electrode are sometimes associated with mimicry. In the earliest games, they were often found in places like the power plant, where items might be scattered around. The idea that a Pokemon could disguise itself as an object was new and interesting. It added a sense of surprise to exploration. Electrode's connection to Pokeballs has also fueled fan theories over the years. Some fans have wondered whether Voltorb and Electrode were created by humans, perhaps as a result of experiments with Pokeball technology. The games have never confirmed that directly, but the resemblance is so strong that it naturally invites curiosity. Even without a confirmed origin story, Electrode feels like a Pokemon that sits on the boundary between nature and technology. In terms of evolution, Electrode's line is very simple. Voltorb evolves into Electrode, and that's it. There is no third stage, no branching evolution, no special item required. It's a straightforward line which fits the early Pokemon design philosophy. Many Generation 1 Pokemon had simple evolution structures, making them easy to understand and easy to use. Electrode's stats reflect its role as a speed-focused Pokemon. It usually has high speed, decent special attack, and relatively average defenses. This makes it a Pokemon that can act quickly, but doesn't always take hits well. In a battle, Electrode often needs to either strike first and win quickly, or use its speed to support the team and then leave before it gets knocked out. One of the fun details about Electrode is how it appears in different media. In the anime, Electrode is often portrayed as a comedic hazard. It might roll into a scene unexpectedly and explode, or it might be used in a power plant setting where its unstable nature causes trouble. This portrayal matches the Pokédex descriptions and reinforces the idea that Electrode is not a calm Pokémon. It is energetic and volatile. Electrode has also appeared in the Pokemon trading card game, where it often has effects related to energy acceleration or self-sacrifice. This fits its theme perfectly. In the card game, Electrode sometimes knocks itself out to provide energy to other Pokemon, reflecting the idea of it releasing its stored electricity in one dramatic moment. Another interesting fact about Electrode is that it has had a regional form introduced in later generations. In the Hisui region, in Pokemon Legends Arceus, there is a Hisuian Voltorb and Hisuian Electrode, which are grass and electric types and resemble wooden Pokeballs rather than modern ones. This regional form adds a fascinating twist to the Pokemon's identity, suggesting that Voltorb and Electrode might be connected not only to modern technology, but to older forms of Pokeball design as well. It also gives Electrode a new look that feels more natural, with a texture like wood grain and a more organic vibe. The existence of Hisuian Electrode also adds depth to the idea that these Pokemon might not be artificial at all, or at least not purely artificial. It suggests that the concept of a ball Pokemon could exist in different forms depending on the region and era, and that Voltorb and Electrode may have adapted over time. In competitive battling, Electrode has often been used as a fast support Pokemon. Its high speed allows it to set up screens, use status moves, and disrupt opponents quickly. It may not always have the raw power to sweep teams, but it can enable other Pokemon to perform better. This is one of those roles that doesn't always feel exciting, but it can be extremely valuable. Electrode's ability options have also changed over time. In some generations, it has abilities like Soundproof, which makes it immune to sound-based moves, or Static, which can paralyze opponents that make contact. These abilities add small layers of usefulness. Soundproof, in particular, is interesting because it fits Electrode's theme of being sealed and insulated, like a container holding energy. Electrode's name is also straightforward and fitting. It comes from electrode, a conductor through which electricity enters or leaves an object. That is exactly what Electrode feels like: a living conductor, a container of energy that can release electricity violently. The name is scientific, simple, and perfectly matched to the Pokemon's concept. In Japanese, Electrode is called Marumin, which references Maru, meaning round, and mine, referencing a mine or explosive. This name highlights its two defining traits. It is round and it explodes. The naming in both languages captures the Pokemon's essence in different ways, one leaning more toward electricity, the other leaning more toward explosion. Electrode is also a Pokemon that can teach players about risk management. Using it in battle can be rewarding because of its speed, but it can also be fragile. Facing it can be stressful because you know it might explode at any moment. In a way, Electrode embodies the idea of unstable power. It has energy, speed, and potential, but it can also say goodbye to the battle in one sudden blast. Even outside of combat, Electrode feels like a Pokemon that adds personality to the world. It's a reminder that not every Pokemon is an animal or a mythical creature. Some are strange, almost abstract beings, shaped like objects and behaving like living hazards. And yet, Electrode still feels like it belongs in the Pokemon universe because the world has always been a mix of nature, mystery, and playful imagination. In the end, Electrode is memorable, not because it has a complicated story, but because it has a very clear identity. It is fast, it is electric, it is unstable. It is always one moment away from releasing everything it has stored inside. And in a world where so many Pokemon are defined by long evolution lines and deep lore, Electrode stands out as something simple and pure, a living burst of energy rolling quietly until the moment it decides it can't hold back anymore. Many people remember Cubone not because it's the strongest or the rarest, but because it carries a certain quiet weight that stands out in the world of Pokemon. It's a small ground-type Pokemon that walks on two legs, holding a bone like a tool or a weapon, and wearing a skull as a helmet. Even if you only see Cubone for a few minutes in a game, the design sticks in your mind. It looks like a creature that has learned to protect itself, not with armor it was born with, but with something it found and chose to carry. Cubone first appeared in Generation 1, introduced in the original Pokemon Red and Blue games. In Kanto, it's most famously found in Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, which is already one of the most emotionally heavy locations in the region. Pokemon Tower is a memorial graveyard for deceased Pokemon, a place where people come to honor those they've lost. So the fact that Cubone appears there is not random. It connects the Pokemon's identity to the theme of memory and loss, and it makes the encounter feel more meaningful than a normal wild battle in tall grass. Cubone's Pokédex entries are some of the most well-known in the series because of the story they tell. Many entries describe Cubone as a Pokemon that mourns its mother, wearing her skull as a helmet and crying at night. The idea is simple but powerful. Cubone isn't just a creature that exists in the wild. It's a creature with grief, a creature whose design reflects a personal history. Pokemon often give small bits of lore through the Pokédex, but Cubone's entries are unusually direct and emotional. In some versions of the Pokédex, Cubone's story is framed as a fact, something that is universally true for all Cubone. In others, it's described in a way that feels more like a legend or a common belief. Either way, the theme remains consistent. Cubone is associated with the loss of its mother, and the skull it wears is knowing and symbolic. Cubone's design is also clever because it leaves room for imagination. The skull it wears doesn't perfectly match Cubone's own face. It looks like a separate object, something that belonged to another creature. The bone it carries looks like a club, but it could also be a tool, something used for digging or defending. Cubone's body is small and simple, but its accessories tell a story. It's a Pokemon whose personality is communicated through what it wears and carries, not through complicated anatomy. In gameplay terms, Cubone is a ground-type Pokemon. Ground is one of the most useful types in Pokemon because it has strong offensive coverage. Ground-type moves are super effective against electric, fire, poison, rock, and steel types, and ground types are immune to electric moves. That immunity alone can make ground types feel valuable in many battles, especially against trainers who rely on electric Pokemon. Cubone's stats are not overwhelming, but it has a respectable attack stat and a defensive profile that makes it feel sturdy for its size. It's not a fast Pokemon, and it's not known for high special attack, but it can hit hard with physical moves. This makes it a Pokemon that often fits into a steady, grounded playstyle. It's the kind of Pokemon that doesn't rush. It absorbs hits and returns them with strong, reliable attacks. Cubone's evolution is Marowak, which it becomes at level 28. Marowak continues Cubone's theme, becoming larger, stronger, and more confident in its use of the bone weapon. The evolution feels natural. Cubone is a small creature learning to survive. Marowak is the adult form that has learned to fight back. Marowak also becomes one of the most story-relevant Pokemon in Kanto because of the Ghost Marowak encounter in Pokemon Tower. In the story, the ghost you face is the spirit of a Marowak that was killed by Team Rocket. This ghost blocks the tower's path until you obtain the Sylph Scope. When you defeat it, the spirit can finally rest. This is one of the most memorable moments in Kanto's narrative, and it makes the Cubone line feel like it has a direct connection to the region's darker story elements. That story moment also creates an interesting relationship between gameplay and lore. In most Pokemon games, wild Pokemon encounters are just random battles, but the Ghost Marowak is not random. It's a scripted story event, and it gives Marowak a role beyond being a Pokemon you catch. It becomes a symbol of what Team Rocket is willing to do, and it becomes one of the few times the series directly acknowledges the idea of Pokemon death in the main storyline. Cubone's connection to Lavender Town is one of the reasons it's so memorable, but it's not the only interesting thing about it. Cubone is also a Pokemon that has inspired many fan theories and discussions over the years, including theories about what skull it's wearing. Some fans have speculated that the skull resembles a Kangaskhan baby, tying into old rumors and unused concepts from early development. The games themselves don't confirm this, but the resemblance and the mysterious nature of the skull have kept the discussion alive for decades. Even without theories, Cubone's skull is an interesting design choice because it raises a question: where does every Cubone get a skull? If the skull is truly its mother's skull, then every Cubone would have to lose its mother, which feels too tragic to apply universally. This has led some people to interpret the Pokédex entries more like folklore, a story told about Cubone rather than a strict biological rule. Pokemon lore often works this way. The Pokédex sometimes presents dramatic statements that may be exaggerated or symbolic rather than literal. Cubone's move pool also fits its identity. It learns moves like Bone Club, which is a ground-type attack that uses its signature bone weapon. It can also learn Bonerang, a move where it throws the bone like a boomerang and hits twice. These moves are iconic because they are directly tied to Cubone's design. Not every Pokemon gets signature moves that match its theme so perfectly, but Cubone does. Cubone can also learn moves like Headbutt, which fits its skull helmet, and it can learn strong ground-type attacks like Earthquake later on. Earthquake is one of the most powerful and reliable moves in the entire series, and any ground-type Pokemon that can learn it becomes more threatening. Cubone may start small, but it has the potential to become a strong physical attacker if trained properly. In the original games, Cubone is not extremely common. It's usually found in Pokemon Tower, and its encounter rate isn't always high. This rarity adds to its mystique. You don't see Cubone everywhere, you find it in one specific place, tied to one specific mood. That makes catching Cubone feel like a special moment, especially for players who like Pokemon with personality. Cubone's role in later games often changes slightly depending on the region. Sometimes it appears in deserts or rocky areas, which fits its ground typing. Sometimes it appears in graveyard-like locations, keeping its thematic connection to mourning. Regardless of where it appears, Cubone tends to keep the same emotional tone. It's a Pokemon that feels quieter than most, like it's always carrying something unseen. In the anime, Cubone also appears in episodes that emphasize its sadness and its bond with its mother. The anime often expands on Pokédex lore by turning it into full stories, and Cubone's story is one of the easiest to adapt because it already has a clear emotional core Seeing Cubone on screen, holding its bone and wearing its skull, makes the idea feel even more real. Cubone also appears in the Pokemon trading card game, where it's often portrayed as a small, determined Pokemon. The card art sometimes shows it standing alone, sometimes training, sometimes looking towards something in the distance. Even in a static image, Cubone tends to carry a sense of quiet determination, as if it's trying to move forward even when it's weighed down by something heavy. From a competitive perspective, Cubone itself is not commonly used in high-level battling, mostly because its evolution, Marowak, is stronger and because there are many other ground types with better stats. However, Cubone has had moments of interest in certain formats, especially in lower-level competitive environments or special rule sets. Its access to strong moves and its ability to hold certain items can make it surprisingly effective in the right context. Marowak, in particular, became famous in later generations because of the item Thick Club, which doubles the attack stat of Cubone or Marowak when held. This item is one of the most powerful species-specific held items in the series. With Thick Club, Marowak's attack becomes extremely high, making it capable of dealing huge damage with moves like Earthquake. This adds a hidden layer of strength to the Cubone line, making it more threatening than its base stats might suggest. The Thick Club is also a fascinating detail because it ties directly into Cubone's identity. Cubone and Marowak fight with bones, so an item that enhances that fighting style makes perfect sense. It's like the Pokemon world acknowledging that this bone weapon is not just decoration, it's central to how the Pokemon survives. Cubone's typing also creates interesting matchups. Ground types are strong, but they have weaknesses too. Water, grass, and ice moves are super effective against ground Pokemon. This means Cubone can struggle in certain areas of the game, especially against water-type trainers or ice-themed battles. But the ground typing also gives it advantages against poison types, which are common in Kanto, and against electric types, which appear in gyms and routes. Cubone's personality is often described as lonely or shy, but also determined. Some Pokédex entries mention that it cries at night and that the cries echo sadly. Others mention that it becomes stronger when it remembers its mother. These descriptions paint Cubone as a Pokémon that carries emotion in a very human way, which is part of why it resonates with players. There's also something about Cubone's silhouette that makes it feel small but brave. It stands upright, holding its bone like a weapon, with its skull helmet making it look like a tiny warrior. It feels like a creature that has had to defend itself in a harsh world. That imagery is powerful, especially in a game series where many Pokemon feel carefree. In later generations, Cubone and Marowak gained new attention through regional forms, especially Alolan Marowak, which becomes fire and ghost type and has a completely different cultural identity. That regional form suggests that the Cubone line can adapt in different environments, taking on different traditions and different ways of living. It adds depth to the idea that Cubone is not just one story. It's a species that can exist in multiple contexts, shaped by the region it lives in. But even with new forms and new interpretations, Cubone's core identity remains. It is a small, ground-type Pokemon defined by a bone and a skull. A creature that looks like it carries memory with it wherever it goes. It is not flashy. It is not loud. It is quiet, steady, and strangely comforting in its simplicity. And maybe that's why Cubone has remained so beloved for so long. It represents something universal, the idea of moving forward even when you've lost something important, the idea of carrying the past without letting it stop you. In the world of Pokemon, where journeys are long and battles are constant, Cubone stands as a reminder that not every strength comes from being the biggest or the fastest. Sometimes strength is simply the ability to keep walking, bone in hand, one small step at a time. Weezing is one of those Pokemon that feels strangely familiar even if you've never used it on a team for very long. It has been around since the earliest days of the series, appearing in Generation 1 as the evolved form of coughing, and its design is so unusual that it tends to stick in your memory. Two round, floating bodies fused together, covered in craters, surrounded by drifting clouds of gas, and often wearing an expression that looks equal parts smug and exhausted. Weezing is a poison-type Pokemon, and its entire identity revolves around the idea of toxic fumes, pollution, and chemical reactions happening inside its body. Coughing evolves into wheezing at level 35, which is a fairly standard evolution level for a mid-game Pokemon. In the original Kanto games, coughing was most famously associated with Team Rocket, showing up repeatedly on Rocket Grunt's teams. That connection alone made Wheezing feel like a signature villain Pokemon for many players. If you fought enough Rocket battles, you eventually saw coughing and wheezing so often that they became almost symbolic of Team Rocket's presence, like a warning sign that trouble was nearby. Weezing's design is one of the clearest examples of Pokemon taking inspiration from something unpleasant and turning it into a creature that fits naturally into the world. It is basically living smog, but given personality and form. The smaller head attached to the larger one makes it look like a strange mutation or a chemical accident, which fits perfectly with the idea that wheezing forms through gas buildup and chemical processes. Even the bumps and craters on its body resemble vents or exhaust ports, like it is constantly releasing pressure. The Pokédex entries for wheezing across the series are very consistent in tone. They often describe it as a Pokemon that stores toxic gases inside its body and releases them in dangerous bursts. Some entries mention that it smells horrible, while others say it can create extremely poisonous fumes that can spread over a wide area. There are also entries that suggest wheezing can float because it is filled with gas, which makes it lighter than air. The concept is simple but effective. Wheezing is basically a balloon of poison. One of the most interesting details about Weezing's Pokédex lore is that it's often described as becoming more toxic in polluted areas. Some entries imply that Weezing thrives in places with industrial waste, factories, and chemical runoff. This suggests that Weezing's existence is tied to human activity, which is an interesting idea in Pokemon world building. Many Pokemon feel like natural creatures, like animals. Weezing feels like a Pokemon that exists because of modern environments, like a species that benefits from pollution. In the Kanto region, Weezing fits naturally into places like the Pokemon Mansion, Team Rocket hideouts, or industrial buildings. Even if the game doesn't explicitly say this area is polluted, the presence of coughing and wheezing gives that impression. They feel like Pokemon that belong in dark corridors and underground facilities, drifting through the air like hazards. Weezing's typing is poison, which gives it a specific set of strengths and weaknesses. Poison types resist grass, fighting, poison, bug, and fairy moves in later generations, though fairy didn't exist in Generation 1. Poison types are weak to ground and psychic attacks, and those weaknesses can be important. In Kanto especially, psychic types were famously strong, which made poison types like Weezing somewhat risky in the late game if you weren't careful. However, Weezing has always had something that makes it stand out among poison types. It is surprisingly bulky. Weezing's defense stat is typically quite high, meaning it can take physical hits well. This makes sense with its design. It looks like a thick, tough balloon of gas and rock-like texture. In battle, this defensive strength allows Weezing to act as a wall against physical attackers, absorbing damage and slowly wearing opponents down. Weezing's move pool supports this role. It often learns moves like Smokescreen, which lowers an opponent's accuracy, and Haze, which removes stat changes. It can learn Toxic, the signature move that inflicts worsening poison over time. It can learn Sludge Bomb, one of the most reliable poison-type attacks, and it can learn Explosion, which is one of the most dramatic finishing moves in Pokémon. Explosion is a move that has become closely associated with Weezing, partly because it fits the idea of a gas-filled Pokémon detonating. In many games, Weezing can learn Self-Destruct or Explosion, and those moves allow it to sacrifice itself to deal massive damage. This gives Weezing a strange dual identity. It can be a slow, defensive Pokémon that wears you down with poison, or it can suddenly end a battle with one huge blast. In the original games, Weezing's role was often limited by the mechanics of poison typing. Poison moves were not always the most useful offensively in Generation 1 because the type chart and move options were different, but Weezing still found value through its bulk and utility. It could poison opponents, lower accuracy, and act as a defensive pivot. Even if it wasn't a flashy attacker, it could be annoying to deal with, which is a kind of strength on its own. Weezing's ability to spread poison is central to its identity. Poison as a status condition is one of the most consistent mechanics in Pokémon. It slowly drains HP at the end of each turn, and it can turn long battles into a race against time. Toxic takes this further by increasing the damage each turn, making it one of the most powerful long-term status effects in the game. A Pokémon like Weezing, which can survive hits, is well suited to using Toxic effectively. Weezing also has access to moves like Will-O-Wisp in later generations, allowing it to burn opponents and reduce their physical attack. This makes it even more of a defensive disruptor. It can weaken opponents without relying on raw damage. It can make a strong attacker feel less threatening simply by applying a status condition and then sitting there, floating, while the opponent's health slowly drains away. Another interesting detail about Weezing is its relationship to Coughing. Coughing is a single round body, while Weezing is two bodies fused together. The evolution feels like an escalation, like the gas buildup inside Coughing has reached a point where it can no longer remain stable. Instead of becoming sleeker or more elegant, it becomes more chaotic and more toxic. This is a rare type of evolution in Pokémon. Many evolutions look like improvements in a heroic sense. Weezing's evolution looks like a mutation. Weezing's name is also clever. It comes from the word wheezing, which is the sound of someone struggling to breathe, often due to smoke or illness. That name fits perfectly. Weezing is literally a Pokémon that makes breathing difficult. It also fits the sound design of the Pokémon, because in the anime, Weezing often makes gasping or hissing noises. In Japanese, Weezing is called Matadogas, which is derived from mata, meaning again or another, and dogas, referencing Coughing's Japanese name, Dogars. The name suggests a second, more intense version of Coughing, which matches the idea of it being an evolved form. Weezing has also appeared in many different Pokémon games and regions beyond Kanto, often maintaining the same role as a poison-type hazard Pokémon. It shows up in industrial areas, caves, and villain team hideouts. It has become a common choice for villain organizations because it visually represents toxicity and danger. When you see a Weezing, it feels like you're dealing with something unpleasant, something that doesn't belong in a clean, peaceful environment. In the anime, Weezing is famously associated with Team Rocket's James, who often uses Weezing as one of his main Pokémon alongside Arbok. James's Weezing is often played for comedy, releasing gas clouds and causing chaos. Even though Wheezing is a toxic Pokemon, the anime portrays it in a silly way, making it part of Team Rocket's comedic identity. This combination of danger and comedy is part of what makes Wheezing memorable. It can be a threat, but it can also be ridiculous. Wheezing's design also includes one of those small details that Pokemon fans love to notice. In some older sprites and artwork, Wheezing appears to have skull and crossbones symbols on its body, suggesting poison warnings. This reinforces its theme as a hazard. It's like a living warning sign. Over time, Wheezing gained even more attention when it received a regional form in the Galar region. Galarian Wheezing is a poison and fairy type, and its design shifts dramatically. Instead of being a smog cloud, it resembles a tall, top hat-shaped gas chimney, almost like an industrial gentleman. It even has a mustache-like cloud formation and a more refined appearance. This regional form is inspired by Victorian-era industrialization, and it represents a different relationship with pollution. Instead of being chaotic toxic gas, Galarian Wheezing is portrayed as filtering pollution, almost like it is cleaning the air. This is a fascinating twist because it takes the same core concept, a gas Pokemon, and gives it a new cultural meaning. Cantonian Wheezing represents toxic smog. Galarian Wheezing represents industrial smoke, but with a strange sense of refinement. It's one of the most creative regional forms in the series because it doesn't just change the type, it changes the story the Pokemon tells. Even in its original form, Wheezing has always been a Pokemon that represents the less glamorous side of the Pokemon world. It isn't cute in the traditional sense. It isn't majestic. It isn't mythical. It's ugly in a deliberate way, and that ugliness makes it interesting. Pokemon as a franchise has always included creatures that are meant to be strange or unsettling, and Wheezing is one of the best examples of that. In competitive battling, Wheezing has had periods of usefulness, depending on the generation and available mechanics. Its physical bulk, access to status moves, and ability to disrupt opponents can make it valuable in defensive teams. It is not usually a top-tier threat, but it can be a reliable wall and a frustrating opponent to face. In formats where physical attackers dominate, Wheezing's high defense can give it a niche. Wheezing's role as a defensive Pokemon is also reflected in its typical strategy. It often uses moves like Pain Split to recover health, Toxic to wear opponents down, and Sludge Bomb for consistent damage. It might also use moves like Thunderbolt or Flamethrower for coverage, depending on the generation. This gives it more flexibility than you might expect from a Pokemon that looks so specialized. There's also something quietly amusing about Wheezing's personality. Its face often looks smug, like it knows it's annoying. It looks like a Pokemon that drifts into battle and simply refuses to go away. It doesn't need to be fast. It doesn't need to be flashy. It just needs to exist, filling the space with poison and forcing you to deal with it. In the end, Wheezing is a Pokemon defined by atmosphere, both literally and metaphorically. It is a cloud of toxic gas given form. It is a reminder that Pokemon's world includes not only forests and oceans, but factories, pollution, and the consequences of human activity. It is a creature that floats quietly, always releasing fumes, always carrying chemical reactions inside itself, and always living on the edge between being a simple nuisance and being a real danger. And even though Wheezing may not be the most beloved Pokemon in the series, it has a kind of staying power that comes from having such a clear identity. It is smog made alive, a drifting hazard with a stubborn presence, and a Pokemon that feels like it belongs in the background of the world, hovering in dim hallways, quietly reminding you that not everything in Kanto is clean air and sunshine. Tangela is one of those Pokemon that feels like it was designed to be mysterious on purpose. At first glance, it's almost hard to tell what you're looking at. A round, blue body completely wrapped in thick vines, with only two large eyes and a pair of small red feet visible. It doesn't have a visible mouth in most of its classic artwork, and its limbs are hidden beneath layers of plant growth, which makes it feel less like an animal and more like a moving bundle of living vegetation. Tangela is a pure grass-type Pokemon, and it has been part of the series since Generation 1, quietly existing as one of Kanto's strangest plant creatures. Tangela first appeared in Pokemon Red and Blue, and it has always been known as a somewhat uncommon encounter. In the original Kanto games, Tangela could be found on Route 21, the long water route south of Pallet Town, which many players didn't explore thoroughly until later in the game. This placement gave Tangela an odd kind of hidden status. It wasn't something you were guaranteed to see. It was something you discovered if you took the time to explore, surf, and wander through tall grass in an area that most people rush through on the way to Cinnabar Island. Because Tangela is a pure grass type, it has the typical strengths and weaknesses associated with that typing. Grass types are strong against water, ground, and rock types, and they resist water, electric, grass, and ground moves. But grass types are also weak to fire, ice, flying, bug, and poison moves, which is a long list of weaknesses. In Kanto, where fire types like Arcanine and Rapidash exist, flying types are common and poison types are everywhere. That weakness list can make grass types feel difficult to use if you don't plan carefully. However, Tangela has always had something that sets it apart from many other grass types. It is surprisingly bulky. Tangela's defense stat is typically quite high, especially compared to other grass Pokemon of its era. This makes it capable of taking physical hits better than you might expect. It doesn't look like a tank, but it can behave like one, absorbing damage while it slowly wears down opponents. Tangela's Pokédex entries often focus on its vines, and they tend to describe them as constantly growing and shedding. Some entries mention that the vines break off easily and can be replaced quickly, suggesting that Tangela is always regenerating its outer layer. This is an interesting detail because it implies that Tangela's vines are not just decoration. They are part of its biology, like fur or feathers, but even more active and alive. There are also entries that describe Tangela as using its vines to entangle opponents. This fits perfectly with its role as a grass type. Tangela can learn moves like Bind in some games, and it also learns moves like Vine Whip and later stronger grass attacks. The idea of Tangela wrapping something up is central to its identity. It doesn't need claws or fangs. It has vines, and vines can restrain, strike, and defend. One of the most interesting things about Tangela is that it originally did not have an evolution in Generation 1. For years, Tangela was a single-stage Pokemon, which made it feel like a strange standalone creature, almost like it was meant to remain mysterious and incomplete. It wasn't until Generation 4 that Tangela gained an evolution, Tangrowth. Tangrowth evolves from Tangela when Tangela levels up while knowing the move Ancient Power. This is one of those evolution methods that feels very deliberate and thematic, because Ancient Power is associated with old, primal energy, and Tangrowth looks like Tangela has grown into something older, larger, and even more overgrown. Tangrowth's existence retroactively changes how Tangela feels. Suddenly, Tangela becomes the juvenile form of something bigger and stronger. But even without Tangrowth, Tangela still feels complete in its own way, because its design is so unique. It doesn't need a flashy evolution to be memorable. It's a blue vine ball with eyes, and that alone is enough to make it stand out. Tangela's name is also a perfect fit. It's a combination of tangle and vines, or tangle and tendril, depending on how you interpret it. It sounds like something messy and plant-like, which matches the way it looks. Tangela feels like it exists to be tangled, to be wrapped up in itself, like a living knot of greenery. In Japanese, Tangela is called monjara, which may be derived from words related to vines or entanglement. Like many early Pokemon names, it has a playful sound that still matches the concept. Tangela's name in both languages emphasizes the same thing. It is something tangled, something wrapped up. Tangela's lack of a visible mouth has also been a long-running point of curiosity. Some official artwork suggests it might have a mouth hidden under the vines, but the fact that it's not clearly shown makes Tangela feel alien. Many Pokemon have faces you can easily understand. Tangela's face is mostly just eyes. This gives it a quiet, staring presence, like it's always watching, always observing. In battle, Tangela's move pool often includes a mix of offensive and defensive tools. It can learn strong grass moves like Mega Drain and Giga Drain, which allow it to recover health while dealing damage. It can learn status moves like Sleep Powder or Stun Spore in some games, which can disrupt opponents. It can also learn moves like Leech Seed, which slowly drains an opponent's HP and transfers it to Tangela, creating a slow, steady form of healing. Leech Seed is especially fitting for Tangela because it plays into the idea of vines and plants feeding off other living things. It's a move that rewards patience. You plant the seed, you wait, and the opponent slowly weakens. For a calm, slow battle style, Tangela can be surprisingly effective. Tangela's stats also make it an interesting case. It tends to have good defense and decent special attack, which means it can hit reasonably hard with special grass moves while still surviving physical hits. Its speed is usually low, which means it often moves second. But moving second isn't always bad. If Tangela can survive the first hit, it can respond with a draining move like Giga Drain and recover some of the damage. Tangela's role in Kanto is also shaped by the environment it appears in. Route 21 is a water route, meaning you're often surfing past Wild Tentacool and Tentacruel. Finding a grass-type Pokemon in that area feels unusual, and it creates an interesting contrast. Tangela is a plant creature living near water, which makes sense, because plants often thrive near rivers and coasts. But in the world of Pokemon, it makes Tangela feel like a hidden surprise in an otherwise ocean-focused area. Tangela has also appeared in many later regions, sometimes in forests, sometimes in grassy fields, sometimes in areas meant to feel overgrown. Wherever it appears, it tends to contribute to the atmosphere. Tangela makes a place feel wild and tangled, like nature has taken over. It's the kind of Pokemon that fits perfectly into an abandoned garden or a forgotten path covered in vines. In the anime, Tangela is often portrayed as playful, but also unpredictable. It can lash out with vines, wrap things up, and create chaos, but it's not necessarily malicious. It's more like a creature that doesn't fully understand how strong its vines are. That portrayal matches the idea of Tangela being a living plant that reacts instinctively. Tangela's vines are also described in some entries as being made of blue plant fibers, which is interesting because real vines are usually green or brown. Tangela's blue color makes it feel unnatural, like it's not based on any ordinary plant. Pokemon often takes real-world inspiration and exaggerates it, and Tangela feels like a plant turned into something fantastical, something that doesn't exist in nature. Tangela also has an interesting relationship with the move Constrict in some older games, a move that represents squeezing an opponent with vines. Constrict is not a powerful move, but it fits Tangela's theme perfectly. It's another example of how early Pokemon design often prioritize thematic consistency over raw effectiveness. When Tangela gained Tangrowth as an evolution, it also gained a new kind of identity. Tangrowth is much larger, with thick arms and a more intimidating presence, but Tangela remains the smaller, more mysterious version. It's like the difference between a small patch of vines and an entire overgrown jungle. Tangela is the seed of that idea. Tangela's evolutionary requirement of knowing ancient power is also fascinating because ancient power is often associated with fossils and prehistoric energy. It suggests that Tangrowth is an older form, like Tangela tapping into something ancient within itself. This is similar to how some Pokemon evolve through special conditions that reflect lore rather than biology. In terms of competitive battling, Tangela and Tangrowth have both had niches, especially in formats where defensive grass types are valuable. Tangela itself, in lower level formats, can be surprisingly strong because of its defense and access to utility moves. Tangrowth, with its higher stats, has often been more popular, but Tangela still has a certain charm as a defensive wall that looks like a harmless bundle of vines. Tangela's abilities also add to its identity. In later generations, Tangela can have abilities like Chlorophyll, which doubles its speed in sunlight, making it faster and more threatening on sun-based teams. It can also have Leaf Guard, which prevents status conditions in sunlight. These abilities reinforce its plant nature and connect it to weather mechanics, like how real plants depend on sunlight. Tangela's hidden ability in some games is Regenerator, which restores a portion of its HP when it switches out. This ability is extremely useful for defensive Pokemon, and it fits Tangela's vine-shedding lore perfectly. If Tangela can constantly regrow vines, then healing when it leaves battle makes sense. It's like it retreats, regrows, and returns refreshed. There's also something quietly comforting about Tangela's design. It looks like a living ball of yarn made of vines. Its eyes are simple and round, giving it a neutral expression. It doesn't look angry or aggressive. It just looks like it exists, tangled up in itself, moving slowly through grass and fields. Even though Tangela's lore includes entangling opponents, it doesn't feel like a villain Pokemon. It feels more like a strange forest creature, something you might stumble upon in an overgrown meadow. It's the kind of Pokemon that makes the world feel alive, like there are species out there that aren't just battle machines, but part of an ecosystem. Tangela's presence in the original 151 also adds to its legacy. It's one of the Pokemon that many people forget exists until they see it again, and then they immediately remember it. It's not a mascot, but it has a strong identity. It's not flashy, but it's unmistakable. In the end, Tangela is a Pokemon defined by its vines, by the idea of being wrapped up, protected, and hidden. It is a creature that reveals almost nothing of itself, except for its eyes and its small feet, and that mystery makes it special. It is a reminder that not every Pokemon needs to be fully understood at a glance. Some can simply be strange, tangled, and quietly fascinating, drifting through the grass like a living knot of nature. Seadra is a Pokemon that feels like it belongs in the quiet, deeper parts of the Pokemon world, where the water gets darker, the currents slow down, and the ocean feels less like a bright beach and more like a living, shifting environment full of strange creatures. It's the evolved form of Horsea, and it carries the same seahorse inspiration, but with sharper edges, darker colors, and a more serious presence. Seadra is a water-type Pokemon introduced in Generation 1, and even though it isn't one of the most talked about Pokemon from the original 151, it has a strong identity that has stayed consistent for decades. Horsea evolves into Seadra at level 32, which places Seadra in a comfortable mid-game evolution range. In the original Kanto games, Horsey and Seadra were often encountered by fishing or surfing in certain areas, and because water routes tend to open up later in the story, Seadra often feels like a Pokemon you meet once the world expands. It isn't one of the earliest water types you catch. It's one you discover when you begin to explore the seas, the coasts, and the routes that connect islands. Seadra's design is a great example of how Pokemon takes a simple real-world animal and pushes it into something more fantastical. A real seahorse is delicate and gentle-looking. Seadra, on the other hand, looks armored. It has sharp spikes on its body, a curled tail, and a pointed snout that looks like it could pierce through the water like a spear. Its belly is lined with pale plates, almost like protective armor, and its fins are shaped in a way that makes it look like it could move with quick bursts rather than slow drifting. The Pokédex entries for Seadra often emphasize how it lives in the ocean and how it defends itself. Many entries describe Seadra as capable of swimming backward by rapidly flapping its wing-like fins. This is a real seahorse trait, since seahorses can maneuver in unusual ways, but Pokemon turns it into something more dramatic. Some entries also mention that Seadra's spikes are poisonous, which is an interesting detail because Seadra itself is not a poison type. Instead, it's a water type with a defensive feature that functions like a built-in deterrent. That idea, that Seadra is protected by dangerous spikes, gives it a natural predator-prey story. In the Pokemon world, you can imagine larger sea Pokemon trying to eat a Seadra and being stabbed or poisoned by its spines. It makes Seadra feel like a creature that survives not by brute force, but by being difficult to attack. Seadra's typing is pure water, which gives it a very stable and useful role in most Pokemon games. Water types are among the most reliable Pokemon in the series because they have relatively few weaknesses and strong offensive options. Water is strong against fire, rock, and ground types, and water Pokemon resist fire, water, ice, and steel moves. The weaknesses of water types are electric and grass, which are common but manageable. This makes Seadra a Pokemon that can be used in many different situations without feeling too fragile. Seadra's stats tend to reflect its role as a mid-stage evolution. It usually has decent special attack and solid defense with moderate speed. It's not a powerhouse like some fully evolved water types, but it can still be very effective in a playthrough, especially if you teach it strong. Water moves like Surf. Surf is one of the most iconic moves in the franchise, not only because it is powerful and reliable, but because it is also an HM used for travel. A water type that can learn Surf becomes both a fighter and a vehicle, a companion that helps you explore the world. Seadra's move pool includes many classic water moves. It can learn Water Gun early, then Bubble Beam, and later stronger moves like Hydro Pump, depending on the generation. Hydro Pump is powerful but less accurate, while Surf is slightly weaker but extremely consistent. Most players prefer Surf for the reliability, especially in long playthroughs where missing a crucial move can turn a battle into a mess. Seadra also learns moves that fit its seahorse inspiration. It can learn moves like Agility, which boosts its speed, reflecting the idea that it can suddenly move faster through the water. It can learn moves like Smokescreen, which is interesting because it suggests Seadra can release a cloud-like distraction underwater, similar to how some sea creatures use ink or camouflage. Smokescreen in battle lowers the opponent's accuracy, and while it isn't always used in playthroughs, it fits the idea of Seadra being a defensive, tricky creature. One of Seadra's most famous traits in the larger Pokemon ecosystem is its relationship to Kingdra. In Generation 1, Seadra was the final form. It did not evolve further. It wasn't until Generation 2 that Seadra gained an evolution, Kingdra. To evolve Seadra into Kingdra, you need to trade it while it holds a dragon scale. This evolution method made Kingdra feel special because it required both a rare item and a trade, which were often seen as late-game mechanics. Kingdra's existence gives Seadra a new kind of identity. Seadra becomes a bridge between a simple water-type seahorse and a powerful water and dragon-type Pokemon. It's like Seadra is the stage where the creature begins to look more armored and serious, and then Kingdra takes it even further, becoming more majestic and dragon-like. Even if you never evolve Seadra into Kingdra, the fact that it can evolve gives it more long-term potential. It's not just a mid-level Pokemon you use temporarily. It can become something that stays with you into the late game, especially if you have access to trading. Seadra's role in the anime also helps define it. In various episodes, Seadra appears as a wild ocean Pokemon, sometimes aggressive, sometimes calm, but always treated as part of the mysterious underwater world. The ocean in Pokemon is often portrayed as vast and unknown, full of creatures you rarely see on land. Seadra fits perfectly into that theme. It looks like a Pokemon that belongs in coral reefs, underwater caves, and hidden sea roots. Seadra's design also includes one of those small Pokemon details that adds texture: its curled tail. Seahorses in real life use their tails to grip onto seaweed and coral, anchoring themselves in place. Seadra's tail is curled in a way that suggests it can do the same. This implies that Seadra might spend time clinging to underwater plants, waiting quietly, blending into the environment until it needs to move. That quiet, patient behavior fits with some Pokédex entries that describe Seadra as living in reefs and being very territorial. Some entries suggest that Seadra will fiercely defend its home. This is a common theme for many Pokemon, but for Seadra, it feels especially fitting because reefs are small, valuable habitats. A reef is a safe space, a place with food and shelter, and a creature like Seadra would likely guard it. Seadra also has a connection to one of the more unusual mechanics in Pokemon: breeding. In later generations, Seadra and Horsey are part of the Dragon Egg group, despite being water types. This is because their design and evolution line connects them to dragons through Kingdra. This is a fun detail because it means Horsey and Seadra are treated as dragon-like creatures in terms of reproduction mechanics, even though they don't look like typical dragons. This blending of categories is part of what makes Pokemon interesting. The series often takes an animal inspiration and then mixes it with mythological or fantasy elements. Seadra is a seahorse, but it is also a creature that can become a dragon. That dual identity gives it a quiet depth. Seadra's name is also very fitting. It sounds like sea combined with dragon, or at least something similar. Even if the name isn't officially stated to mean that, the sound of it feels oceanic and powerful. In Japanese, Seadra is called Seadra as well, written as Shidola, which carries the same sound and the same feeling. Another interesting part of Seadra's story is how it has been used in different games. In some titles, Seadra is relatively common once you reach certain water routes. In others, it is rarer, making it feel more special. In Pokemon Go, for example, Horsey and Seadra have been available in water-themed events, and evolving into Seadra is often seen as a stepping stone toward Kingdra. Seadra's presence in the Pokemon trading card game also reflects its identity. Seadra cards often have moves related to water pressure, fast strikes, or defensive effects. The art frequently shows Seadra swimming through underwater environments, surrounded by bubbles or seaweed, reinforcing the calm, aquatic vibe. Seadra is also a Pokemon that benefits from the general strength of water types. Even if its stats are not extraordinary, water as a type has so many useful moves and matchups that Seadra can still perform well. Surf, Ice Beam, and other special moves can give Seadra coverage against many threats. Ice Beam, for example, is a common move taught to water types through TMs, and it allows them to hit grass types, dragon types, and flying types more effectively. Seadra can learn Ice Beam in many games, making it more versatile. That versatility is one of the reasons water types are so beloved. They often become the backbone of a team. Seadra can fill that role in a quieter way, not as a famous starter like Blastoise, but as a wild-caught companion that grows stronger over time. There's also something aesthetically pleasing about Seadra. Its color palette is usually a mix of blue and white, with a darker, cooler tone than many other water types. It looks like a creature from deeper water, not shallow tropical seas. It has sharp, clean lines, and its silhouette is elegant despite the spikes. It feels like a Pokémon that could be dangerous, but also beautiful. Seadra's spikes are one of its defining features, and they create a sense of danger. You can imagine trying to grab a Seadra and immediately regretting it. This fits with Pokédex entries that say it can injure predators with its spikes. It's a reminder that even smaller ocean Pokémon can defend themselves in harsh environments. In later generations, Seadra and Kingdra gained more attention due to competitive battling. Kingdra became known for its ability to thrive in rain teams, using Swift Swim to double its speed in rain. While Seadra itself is not usually the centerpiece of such strategies, it is the necessary step to reach Kingdra, and that gives it importance in the line. Seadra is also one of those Pokémon that feels like it exists quietly in the background of the world. It's not a legendary, it's not a mascot, it's not a gym leader's signature Pokémon in most cases, but it's part of the ocean's ecosystem, part of what makes the Pokémon world feel larger than the routes you walk on land. In the end, Seadra is a Pokémon that represents the sea in a calm, steady way. It is a creature built for underwater life, armored with spikes, moving with quiet control, and existing in reefs and currents that most trainers only briefly visit. It reminds you that the Pokémon world is full of environments beyond cities and forests, and that beneath the surface of the water, there are creatures like Seadra, drifting and waiting, living their own lives in the quiet blue depths. Scyther is one of those Pokémon that feels like it was designed to look fast, even when it's standing still. It has a sharp, angular body, long limbs, and those iconic scythe-like blades for arms that make it look like a creature built for cutting through air and grass with the same ease. Scyther is a bug and flying type Pokémon introduced in Generation 1, and even though it isn't a legendary or a starter, it has always carried an elite feeling, like the kind of Pokémon you don't just stumble into early on. When you meet Scyther for the first time, it often feels like you found something special. In the original Pokémon Red and Blue games, Scyther had an interesting kind of status because of where it could be obtained. In Pokémon Red, Scyther was a version-exclusive Pokémon found in the Safari Zone, while Pokémon Blue had Pinsir instead. That version exclusivity gave Scyther a certain mystique. If you were playing Pokémon Blue, you couldn't get Scyther without trading. If you were playing Pokémon Red, catching Scyther in the Safari Zone felt like a rare reward, something you had to actively hunt for. The Safari Zone itself is an unusual place in Pokémon because it changes the rules of catching. Instead of battling wild Pokémon normally, you use Safari Balls and have limited options like throwing bait or rocks. You also have a limited number of steps before you're forced to leave. This makes catching rare Pokémon like Scyther feel tense. You might finally encounter one, only for it to flee immediately. That tension makes the moment memorable, and for many players, Scyther became one of the Safari Zone trophies, a Pokemon that proved you were lucky or persistent. Scyther's design is based on a praying mantis, but it is exaggerated into something more like a prehistoric insect warrior. Its body is green, its wings are transparent, and its head has sharp features that make it look alert and predatory. Its eyes are narrow and intense, and its blades look like they could slice through trees. Even though it's a bug type, which in early Pokemon games often meant weak early route Pokemon, Scyther breaks that stereotype completely. It looks powerful, and it often is. The Pokedex entries for Scyther usually emphasize its speed and its cutting ability. Many entries describe it as moving so fast it appears invisible, or slicing through tall grass with ease. Some entries mention that its blades are sharp enough to cut through thick objects, and that it uses them to hunt prey. This gives Scyther a predatory identity. It isn't just a bug that flutters around, it's a hunter. Scyther's typing is bug and flying, which gives it a mix of strengths and weaknesses that can be both useful and risky. Bug types are strong against grass, psychic, and dark types, while flying types are strong against grass, fighting, and bug types. That gives Scyther good offensive coverage against several common enemies. However, bug and flying also creates major weaknesses, especially to rock-type moves. Scyther has a double weakness to rock attacks, meaning moves like Rock Slide can hit it extremely hard. It is also weak to fire, electric, ice, and flying moves. Despite those weaknesses, Scyther's stats often make it feel like a strong attacker. It typically has high attack and good speed, which allows it to strike first and deal heavy physical damage. Scyther's defense and special defense are usually not as impressive, meaning it doesn't like taking hits, but if it can move first and knock out opponents quickly, it doesn't need to survive long battles. In the early generations, Scyther's role was somewhat limited by the available moves. Bug-type moves were not as strong or as varied in Generation 1, and many bug Pokemon struggled because their best moves were weak. Scyther, however, still had value because it could use strong normal-type moves and flying-type moves. It could learn moves like Wing Attack in later generations, and in Generation 1 it had Slash, a move that was especially powerful because of how critical hits worked. Slash is an interesting part of Scyther's history. In Generation 1, critical hit rates were influenced by speed, and Scyther's speed was high. Slash also had a high critical hit ratio. This combination meant Scyther could land critical hits very frequently, making Slash feel extremely strong. Many players remember Scyther as a slash machine because of this, slicing through opponents with repeated critical hits. Scyther also learns moves like Sword Stance, which boosts its attack sharply. Sword Stance is one of the most powerful setup moves in the series because it doubles the user's attack stat. For a Pokemon like Scyther, which already has high attack and speed, Sword Stance can turn it into a devastating sweeper. The idea of Scyther sharpening itself and then tearing through opponents fits its theme perfectly. Scyther's name is also simple and effective. It sounds like scythe, the curved farming blade, and it also resembles the word slither or fighter, giving it an aggressive tone. In Japanese, Scyther is called strike, which emphasizes its attacking nature even more. The Japanese name makes Scyther feel like a fast striker, a creature built to hit first and hit hard. One of the most interesting things about Scyther is how it has evolved in the franchise over time. For a long time, Scyther did not evolve. It was a standalone Pokemon, like many Generation 1 species that didn't have evolutions until later generations expanded the Pokédex. That changed in Generation 2, when Scyther gained an evolution, Scizor. Scizor evolves from Scyther through trading while holding a metal coat. Scizor is a bug and steel type Pokemon, and it takes Scyther's concept and shifts it into something heavier and more armored. Scizor's design is red and metallic, with pincer-like claws instead of blades. It looks like a more industrial, more powerful version of Scyther. This evolution gave Scyther a new kind of relevance. Suddenly, Scyther wasn't just a cool bug Pokemon. It was the pre-evolution of one of the strongest bug types in the series. The trade evolution method for Scizor also made it feel special. It required a specific item and a trade, which meant not everyone could get it easily. This kept Scizor rare and desirable, and it made Scyther valuable even if you didn't plan to use it long term. Catching a Scyther meant you had access to Scizor if you had the right resources. Scyther also gained another evolution path much later in Generation 8 in Pokemon Legends, Arceus, where it could evolve into Kleavor using a black Augurite. Kleavor is a bug and rock-type Pokemon, and it looks like a more ancient, rugged version of Scyther, with stone-like axes for arms. This added an entirely new layer to Scyther's identity. It suggested that Scyther's evolution could go in different directions depending on environment and materials, like a branching evolutionary history. The existence of both Scizor and Kleavor makes Scyther one of the more interesting evolutionary hubs in Pokemon. It begins as a fast, blade-armed insect, and then it can become either a steel-armored fighter or a stone-axe predator. This kind of branching evolution is rare, and it gives Scyther a lasting relevance in the franchise. Scyther's presence in the anime also helped cement its reputation. Scyther often appears as a powerful wild Pokemon or a strong opponent, sometimes portrayed as a rare predator in forests. Its speed and blades make it look dangerous on screen, and battles involving Scyther often feel more intense than battles with ordinary bug types. Scyther has also appeared in the Pokemon trading card game, where it often functions as a fast attacker. Many Scyther cards have low energy costs for attacks, reflecting its speed, and the artwork often shows it slashing through air or cutting through tall grass. Even in a card game, Scyther's identity remains consistent. It is quick, sharp, and aggressive. Another interesting aspect of Scyther is its relationship to the concept of bug Pokemon being weak. In the earliest games, many bug types were indeed weaker, designed for early routes and early gyms. Scyther, however, was a bug type that felt like a mid to late game reward. It was rare, strong, and visually intimidating. This made Scyther one of the Pokemon that helped change how players thought about bug types. It showed that bug Pokemon could be powerful too. Scyther's double weakness to rock is one of the biggest limitations it has. In competitive play, this weakness is especially dangerous because Stealth Rock, an entry hazard move introduced in Generation 4, deals damage when a Pokemon switches in based on its weakness to rock. Scyther takes massive damage from Stealth Rock because of its typing. This has made Scyther harder to use competitively compared to Scizor, which has a steel typing that reduces its rock weakness and makes it far more durable. However, Scyther still has advantages. Its speed is higher than Scizor's, and it can hold an item called Eviolite in later generations. Eviolite boosts the defense and special defense of Pokemon that can still evolve. Because Scyther can evolve into Scizor, it qualifies for Eviolite, making it surprisingly bulky while still maintaining its speed and attack. This has allowed Scyther to have niche roles in certain competitive formats, acting as a fast, durable pivot. Scyther also has access to moves like U-turn, which allows it to attack and then switch out. U-turn is one of the best utility moves in competitive Pokemon because it maintains momentum A fast Pokemon like Scyther using U-turn can strike first, deal damage, and then bring in a teammate safely. This fits Scyther's hit-and-run predator identity perfectly. Scyther's ability options also support its style. It can have Technician, which boosts the power of weaker moves, making attacks like Aerial Ace or Quick Attack more effective. It can also have Swarm, which boosts Bug-type moves when its HP is low. These abilities encourage Scyther to be aggressive, either by enhancing its quick strikes or making it more dangerous when it's weakened. In the world of Pokemon, Scyther feels like a creature that lives in tall grass and forest edges, waiting quietly, blending into green leaves until it suddenly moves with frightening speed. Its wings suggest it can fly, but it doesn't feel like a graceful bird Pokemon. It feels like a fast insect that uses flight as a tool for hunting rather than travel. Scyther's design also has a small detail that adds to its realism. Its wings look delicate compared to its body. Insects often have thin wings that can still support fast movement, and Scyther's wings reflect that. It's another example of Pokemon taking real biology and turning it into something stylized. In the end, Scyther is a Pokemon that has stayed popular because it has a clear and exciting concept. It's a praying mantis turned into a blade-armed fighter, fast enough to seem invisible, sharp enough to cut through anything, and rare enough to feel special when you catch it. It represents a kind of wild strength in the Pokemon world, a reminder that even among the bug types, there are predators, hunters, and creatures built not just to survive, but to dominate their territory with speed and precision. A bright crackle of energy has a way of waking up the whole room, even when everything else feels quiet. And Electabuzz is a Pokemon that carries that exact kind of presence wherever it goes. It doesn't glide in gently or hide in tall grass with subtlety. It stands out immediately, bold and striped like a warning sign, humming with electricity like a live wire given arms and legs. Electabuzz has been part of Pokemon since Generation 1, and even though it isn't a legendary Pokemon or a starter, it has always felt rare, special, and slightly dangerous in a way that makes it memorable the moment you encounter it. Electabuzz is an electric-type Pokemon introduced in the original Pokemon Red and Blue games as one of the classic, single-stage powerhouses of the early Pokédex. In Generation 1, it did not evolve from anything, and it did not evolve into anything. It simply existed as Electabuzz, a mid to late game electric Pokemon that felt like a prize, something you were meant to be excited about catching. That role gave Electabuzz a kind of prestige. Many early game Pokemon evolve quickly and feel replaceable, but Electabuzz feels like a Pokemon you add to your team because you want something strong and distinctive. In the original games, Electabuzz was a version-exclusive Pokemon. In Pokemon Red, players could catch Electabuzz in the power plant, while Pokemon Blue players could catch Magmar instead. That exclusivity made Electabuzz feel even more special, because it wasn't just rare in the wild, it was literally unavailable depending on which version you owned. If you wanted both Electabuzz and Magmar, you needed to trade, which made them feel like collector Pokemon, the kind that encouraged social play. The power plant itself is a perfect location for Electabuzz. It's one of Kanto's most memorable optional areas, filled with electric-type Pokemon like Voltorb, Pikachu, Magneton, and the legendary Zapdos. It has a distinct atmosphere, like a place that was once active and important, but is now abandoned, left humming with leftover energy and wild Pokemon. Finding Electabuzz there feels fitting, like it belongs in the heart of electrical machinery and broken generators. Electabuzz's design is one of the most iconic electric-type designs from the early generations. It's humanoid in shape, with thick arms, strong legs, and a body covered in yellow fur or skin with bold black stripes. Those stripes are often compared to a tiger or a warning pattern, like nature's way of saying this creature is dangerous. Electabuzz also has two antenna-like horns on its head, which resemble plugs or prongs, reinforcing the idea that it is connected to electricity not just as an element, but as a function. Its face is also memorable. Electabuzz often looks like it has a slightly mischievous expression, with narrow eyes and a mouth that seems ready to grin or snarl. It doesn't look calm. It looks like it's always energized, always buzzing with motion. Even in still artwork, Electabuzz looks like it could start moving at any moment. The Pokédex entries for Electabuzz across the series often focus on how it interacts with electricity. Many entries describe it as gathering near power plants or stormy areas where electricity is abundant. Some mention that it can cause blackouts by feeding on electricity, or that it appears when there are thunderstorms. This gives Electabuzz a natural predator-like role in the world of energy, like it hunts electricity the way other Pokémon hunt food. Some entries also describe the way Electabuzz's body generates or stores electrical power. It's often said to have organs that produce electricity, and that its body crackles with energy when it becomes excited or angry. This is a common theme for electric Pokémon, but Electabuzz feels like one of the purest examples. It isn't electricity themed because it shoots lightning from a cute face. It's electricity themed because it looks like it lives inside the concept of electrical danger. Electabuzz's typing is pure electric, which gives it a simple but effective battle identity. Electric types are strong against water and flying Pokémon, and those are two types that appear frequently throughout Pokémon games. Water routes, ocean areas, and flying trainers are everywhere, and electric moves are a reliable way to handle them. Electric types also resist electric, flying, and steel moves, giving them a useful defensive profile. Their biggest weakness is ground-type moves, because ground attacks are super effective against electric types, and ground types are immune to electric attacks. That ground weakness is important because it forces Electabuzz users to think carefully. You can't always rely on Thunderbolt to solve every problem. If a ground type appears, Electabuzz has to either switch out or use a non-electric coverage move. This is part of what makes electric types interesting. They are powerful and reliable, but they have a clear counter. Electabuzz's stats are one of the reasons it feels so strong. It typically has good speed and solid special attack, which means it can strike quickly with electric moves that hit hard. Its attack is also decent, which gives it some flexibility. It isn't the bulkiest Pokémon, but it isn't paper-thin either. It tends to feel like a fast, aggressive attacker, the kind that can enter battle, hit first, and pressure opponents immediately. In Generation 1, the special stat was a single combined stat for both special attack and special defense. Electabuzz benefited from this because it meant its special power and its special durability were tied together. It could hit hard with electric moves and also resist special attacks better than some other Pokémon. This helped Electabuzz feel more consistent in the late game. Electabuzz's move pool includes many classic electric-type moves, Thunder Shock early on, then stronger moves like Thunder Punch and Thunderbolt. Thunderbolt has long been considered one of the best moves in the series because it is powerful, accurate, and reliable. Electabuzz using Thunderbolt feels like a natural match, like it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Thunder Punch is also an interesting move for Electabuzz because it fits its humanoid design. Unlike some electric Pokémon that feel more like animals or floating creatures, Electabuzz has arms that look like they're meant to punch. Thunder Punch makes it feel like a close-range fighter, an electric-type brawler rather than a distant lightning shooter. Electabuzz can also learn moves like Psychic in some generations, which gives it extra coverage, and it can learn moves like Ice Punch depending on the game. Ice Punch is particularly useful because it allows Electabuzz to hit ground types and grass types more effectively, giving it a way to fight back against some of its natural counters. The elemental punches have always been a fun part of Electabuzz's identity because they make it feel like a versatile fighter with different techniques. Electabuzz's presence in the anime also helped cement its popularity. It has often been portrayed as a strong electric Pokémon, sometimes used by trainers who specialize in electricity or by opponents meant to feel dangerous. In some episodes, Electabuzz appears in gyms or tournaments, using its speed and power to overwhelm opponents. It tends to be treated as a serious battler, not a joke Pokémon. Electabuzz is also tied to one of the most famous Pokémon trainers in the franchise, the Electric-type gym leader, Lieutenant Surge. While Surge's signature Pokémon is usually Raichu, Electabuzz fits the same theme of powerful electric fighters. Even if Surge doesn't always use Electabuzz in every version of the games, Electabuzz still feels like it belongs in that world of gym battles and electric arenas. In the Pokémon trading card game, Electabuzz has often been a notable card as well. In early sets, Electabuzz cards were popular because they could deal decent damage quickly and fit well into fast electric decks. This gave Electabuzz a reputation not only in the video games, but in the card game community as well. It became one of those Pokémon that felt strong across multiple formats. One of the biggest changes to Electabuzz's long-term role came in Generation 2, when it gained a baby pre-evolution, Elekid. Elekid is a small, energetic electric Pokémon that hatches from eggs, and it evolves into Electabuzz at level 30. This addition gave Electabuzz more of a family line and made it feel less like a standalone creature. It also made Electabuzz feel like a middle stage rather than a final form, even though for many years it still was the final form in battle terms. Then, in Generation 4, Electabuzz gained an evolution of its own, Electivire. Electivire evolves from Electabuzz when Electabuzz is traded while holding an Electrizer. This evolution transformed Electabuzz's identity again. Suddenly, Electabuzz wasn't just a strong electric type, it was the middle form of a full 3-stage line, with Electivire as a powerful final evolution. Electivire's design is bulkier and more aggressive, with large arms and tail-like cables, making it look like an electric powerhouse. The existence of Electivire made Electabuzz feel like a stepping stone to something even stronger, but it didn't erase Electabuzz's charm. In fact, it gave Electabuzz more relevance, because now players had a reason to raise it, trade it, and evolve it. Even with Electivire existing, Electabuzz still has a distinct feel. It's leaner and faster looking than Electivire, and it has that classic Generation 1 style, where the design is bold and simple without too many extra details. Some players even prefer Electabuzz's design because it feels cleaner and more iconic. Electabuzz's abilities have also helped shape its role in battle. In many games, Electabuzz can have static, which gives it a chance to paralyze opponents that make contact. This fits the idea of it being charged with electricity. If you touch Electabuzz, you might get shocked. It can also have Vital Spirit in some generations, which prevents it from falling asleep. Vital Spirit is an interesting ability because it matches Electabuzz's energetic personality. It feels like a Pokémon that never stops moving, never fully relaxes. Electabuzz's place in the Pokémon world is also tied to the idea of storms and power. Many electric Pokémon are described as appearing during thunderstorms, and Electabuzz fits that image well. You can imagine it standing on a hill during a storm, electricity flashing around it, drawing energy from the air. It feels like a creature that thrives in chaos, but in a controlled way, like it understands electricity as a natural force. At the same time, Electabuzz is not a legendary Pokemon. It is a wild creature, a species that can be found and caught. That makes it feel approachable. It's powerful, but it's not unreachable. It's a reminder that the Pokemon world has dangerous species living in ordinary places, and that trainers can earn their strength by exploring and taking risks. Even the sound of Electabuzz's name carries energy. It has that buzzing buzz in the middle, like a vibrating wire. It's a name that sounds electric. It feels like it belongs to something that crackles and hums. In the end, Electabuzz is a Pokemon that represents electricity in a very direct, physical way. It isn't just a cute mascot for the type. It's a creature that looks like a warning sign, moves like a fighter, and lives like a storm chaser. It has a history tied to version exclusives, power plants, and late-game discovery, and it has remained memorable across decades of Pokemon games because it captures something simple and exciting: the idea of raw energy given shape, standing on 2 feet, ready to spark at any moment.